They found her frozen to a park bench with nothing but a garbage bag full of rags, and the whole town said it was a shame but not a surprise. What nobody knew, not the paramedics, not the pastor, not even the woman who took her in, was that sewn into the lining of that garbage bag was a trust document worth more than every house in the county combined. And by the time the truth came out, it was already too late for the people who should have loved her most. Welcome to Whispered Journeys. Tonight we bring you a story called The Ember, a tale about two women the world had already forgotten, and the winter that reminded them both what warmth really means. If stories like this bring you peace before sleep, take a moment now to subscribe so you never miss a new journey. Settle in. Let the quiet find you. We begin. The first snow of November came early to Haverstone, Vermont, falling in fat, lazy flakes that stuck to everything. The split-rail fences along Route 12, the rusted mailboxes tilting on their posts, the windshield of a 2004 Chevy pickup crawling south at 35 miles an hour, with a woman behind the wheel who had no business driving in weather like this, but had run out of choices 3 years ago and never found any new ones. Dorothea Hale. To anyone who still bothered to use her name, gripped the steering wheel with both hands. Her knuckles were swollen at the joints, pink and tight from decades of New England winters, and from the arthritis she refused to complain about, because complaining cost energy, and energy was a currency she could no longer afford to waste. She was 68 years old. She weighed 119 pounds, down from 140 before Walter died. Her hair, once the color of dark honey, had gone the silver white of birch bark, and she wore it pulled back in a low knot that she tied each morning without looking in the mirror. Because the mirror showed her things she was not ready to discuss. The heater in the truck worked barely. It coughed warm air in bursts like a man trying to tell a secret between fits of bronchitis. The radio had died sometime in September. Dot didn't miss it. Silence had become her closest companion, more reliable than the truck, more honest than the bank, and far less judgmental than the women at the Methodist church who whispered behind their hymnals every Sunday about the Hale farm and how long before the county took it. On the passenger seat, a canvas tote bag sat slumped against the door. Inside were 3 mason jars of maple syrup. Grade A dark, robust, hand-tapped from the old sugar maples behind the barn, hand-boiled in the same evaporator Walter's father had welded from scrap steel in 1971. This morning, Dot had driven 40 minutes to the Saturday farmers market in Montpelier with 12 jars arranged on a folding table with a handwritten sign that read, Hale Farm Pure Vermont Maple, $14 per jar. She'd sold 9. The 3 that remained had a crack in the wax seal invisible to the eye, but enough to make Dot pull them back rather than sell something imperfect. $126, minus gas, minus the $5 table fee. That left her with $109 to add to the $38 she had in the coffee can above the refrigerator. $147 to her name. The property tax bill sitting on the kitchen table was for $4,216, and it was 3 months overdue. Dot did the math the way she always did, silently, precisely, and with the grim efficiency of a woman who had spent 40 years as a school nurse calculating dosages for children whose parents couldn't afford a doctor. The numbers never changed. They only grew. She thought about Walter. She thought about Walter the way she always thought about Walter, not in grand sweeping memories, but in small unbearable details. The way he folded his socks into little bundles. The sound of his boots on the porch at dusk, always 2 stomps to shake off the mud, always the left foot first. The way he said her full name, Dorothea, only when something mattered. The last thing he ever said to her was Dorothea. Come look at this sky. And she had been folding laundry and said just a minute, and the minute stretched into forever. Because when she finally came outside, he was already on the ground beside the tractor, with his face turned toward the clouds, and his eyes open, and his heart finished. 3 years. 3 years of sleeping on one side of a bed built for 2. 3 years of setting one plate at a table made for 4. 3 years of talking to a photograph on the mantel because the photograph never interrupted, never disagreed, and never left. On the mantel beside the photograph was a half-finished wool blanket draped over the arm of Walter's reading chair. Dot had started knitting it the autumn before he died. Corriedale wool from sheep she'd raised herself carded, and spun on the old wheel in the attic dyed with black walnut husks, until it turned the color of warm earth. She'd been making it for Walter, a Christmas gift. He died in October, and the blanket sat unfinished needles still threaded, waiting for hands that had lost their reason to keep going. She hadn't touched it in 3 years. Sometimes at night, she'd look at it from across the room and think she should unravel the whole thing. Wind the yarn back into balls, start something new. But starting something new required believing that the future existed, and Dot was not entirely sure it did. The snow was thickening now, turning the road into a wide tunnel. Dot leaned forward, squinting through the flakes. Route 12 between Montpellier and Haverstone was a road that tourists found charming in October and terrifying in November. A 2-lane blacktop that wound through the Green Mountains like a dropped ribbon, hugging ravines on one side and granite ledge on the other. No guardrails, no streetlights, no cell service for the last 14 miles. She was thinking about the tax bill. She was thinking about whether the old furnace would survive another winter, or whether she'd have to close off the upstairs bedrooms again and sleep by the wood stove in the kitchen, like she'd done last February when the oil ran out. She was thinking about all of this when she saw the shape. At first it looked like a deer, a dark mass at the edge of the road, half in the ditch, motionless against the white. Dot eased off the gas, her foot hovering over the brake, scanning for others. Deer traveled in groups this time of year, and hitting one at 35 would end her truck and possibly her life. But it wasn't a deer. It was a person. A woman sitting collapsed in the frozen grass beside the road, leaning against a stone mile marker. The way a drunk leans against a lamppost with the desperate stillness of someone who has stopped moving, not by choice but by the failure of the body to continue. She was wrapped in what appeared to be a man's overcoat. Several sizes too large, black or dark gray, the collar pulled up over her ears. Her legs were stretched out in front of her, and her feet were in shoes that were not shoes for November in Vermont. Thin canvas sneakers soaked through one of them, untied, and she was holding something, clutching it against her chest with both arms as if it were a child. A large garbage bag, black plastic, bulging with unknown contents, cinched at the top with a twist tie. Dot's foot found the brake. The truck slowed, fishtailed slightly on the fresh snow, and came to a stop 20 feet past the woman. In the rearview mirror, Dot could see the figure hadn't moved, hadn't even turned her head at the sound of the engine. "Keep driving," said the voice in Dot's mind. The practical voice. The voice that counted dollars and measured oil and knew exactly how many cords of firewood stood between her and March. You don't know this person. You don't have room. You don't have food. You barely have enough heat for yourself. Dot sat there with the engine idling, watching her breath cloud the windshield. She looked at the rearview mirror again. The woman's head had dropped forward. Her chin was on her chest. The snow was accumulating on her shoulders like epaulets. She thought of Walter. Not the Walter who died, but the Walter who lived. The Walter who once drove 9 miles in a blizzard to bring soup to a man he barely knew, because he'd heard the man's wife had left. The Walter who opened the barn to migrant workers every September without being asked. The Walter who said to her once on a night when they had given away the last of their firewood to a neighbor and had nothing left for themselves, "Warmth isn't something you keep, Dorothea. It's something you give away." Dot put the truck in reverse. She backed up slowly, the tires crunching on snow and gravel, until the passenger window was level with the woman. She rolled it down. Cold air rushed in sharp as a blade. Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman flinched. Not a flinch of surprise, but of fear, the involuntary contraction of someone who has learned that attention from strangers rarely brings anything good. She pulled the garbage bag tighter against her body and turned her face away, revealing a profile carved by age and wind, and something worse than both. Hunger, maybe, or grief, They look the same after enough time. Please. The voice that came from the woman was not a voice but a sound, dry cracked like a branch breaking under ice. Please don't take my things, it's all I have. The words hit Dot harder than the cold. She turned off the engine, pulled the keys from the ignition, and opened her door. The snow caught her, immediately stinging her cheeks, finding the gap between her collar and her neck. She walked around the front of the truck, her boots leaving deep prints in the white, and stopped 3 feet from the woman. Up close, the damage was worse. The woman was older than Dot by a good margin, maybe 80, maybe more. Her face was a topography of wrinkles so deep they held shadows even in the flat light of the snowstorm. Her hands, wrapped around the garbage bag, were knotted with arthritis worse than Dot's own. The knuckles distended, the fingers bent at angles that spoke of years of pain managed and ignored. Her lips were blue, not metaphorically blue, medically blue. The blue of poor circulation, of a body redirecting its last reserves of heat to the organs that mattered most, abandoning the extremities to the cold. Dot's training kicked in. 40 years of school nursing meant she could read a body the way a mechanic reads an engine. This woman was hypothermic. Early stage, maybe transitioning to moderate. Confused, shivering. No, not shivering. That was worse. When you stop shivering, it means the body has given up trying. I'm Dot. I'm not going to take anything from you. I'm going to help you into my truck. Can you stand? The woman looked up. Her eyes were extraordinary pale gray. The color of river ice, clouded at the edges by cataracts, but still sharp at the center. Still alive with something that the cold had not yet killed. Intelligence. Defiance. And beneath both a sorrow so vast it seemed geological, like a canyon cut by centuries of water. Why? The woman's mouth barely moved. Why would you stop? Because you're a person sitting in the snow, and I'm a person with a truck, and those two facts don't need any more reason than that. The woman stared at Dot for a long moment, searching for the lie, finding none. I smell bad. I haven't bathed in. I'm dirty. I'll ruin your seats. Dot bent down, feeling her knees protest, and extended her hand. The seats have survived worse than dirt, ma'am. Come on, let's get you warm. The woman took her hand. Her grip was weak, bird-like, but Dot felt the bones beneath the skin, and they were the bones of someone who had once been strong. She pulled gently, steadying the woman as she rose on legs that buckled twice before holding. The garbage bag scraped against the frozen ground as the woman dragged it with her, refusing to let go even for a second. Getting her into the truck took 3 minutes of careful maneuvering. The running board was high, the woman's legs were stiff, and the garbage bag had to come with her, which meant Dot had to half lift it into the cab while keeping the woman from falling backward into the ditch. By the time they were both inside, Dot was breathing hard and the woman was trembling, shivering again, which was actually a good sign, the body trying once more. Dot reached behind the seat. Her fingers found fabric, the wool blanket, the unfinished one. She kept it in the truck because it was the warmest thing she owned, and because in some irrational way having it close made her feel like Walter was riding along. She hesitated. The blanket was Walter's. The blanket was the last thing her hands had made with love and intention. The blanket was unfinished and precious and hers. She draped it over the woman's shoulders. The wool settled around the thin frame like a second skin, and the woman, this stranger who smelled of unwashed clothes and old sweat and roadside mud, made a sound that Dot would remember for the rest of her life. It was not a word. It was not a cry. It was a sigh so deep it seemed to come from the center of the earth. The sound of a body remembering what comfort felt like after forgetting for too long. Thank you. The woman's cracked lips moved against the wool. God bless you. Nobody stopped. I walked for 2 days and nobody stopped. Dot turned the key. The engine caught, the heater groaned to life, and the truck pulled back onto the road. I'm taking you home with me. It's another 20 minutes. There's soup on the stove and a bed with clean sheets. The woman pressed her face into the blanket, breathing in the scent of lanolin and cedar and the ghost of a life she didn't know. but recognized anyway the scent of a home where someone was loved. "I'm Constance. People used to call me Connie." "Well, Connie, you're going to be all right now." Dot said it the way she said everything plainly without drama, with the quiet authority of a woman who had weathered enough storms to know that survival was not about grand gestures, but about small stubborn decisions made one after another in the dark. The truck crawled through the snow toward Haverstone, its headlights carving two pale tunnels in the white. In the passenger seat, Connie Aldridge, whose real name appeared on trust documents, held in a vault at the First International Bank of Burlington, whose signature alone could unlock accounts containing $12 million in accumulated timber and mineral royalties, whose children had changed the locks on her own front door and told her to die quietly somewhere that wouldn't embarrass the family. Closed her eyes and felt warmth for the first time in 11 days. And in her arms, inside the garbage bag that smelled of rot and roadside, wrapped in 3 layers of black plastic and sealed with packing tape, sat a leather portfolio embossed with a gold seal. Inside it were the original trust documents, the power of attorney, that only her thumbprint could activate, and a handwritten letter from her late husband, Edmund, that began, "My dear Connie, if you are reading this, then someone has failed you, and I am sorry I was not there to prevent it." She said nothing. The test had begun. The Hale farm announced itself before it appeared, a mailbox leaning 15 degrees to the left with the name Hale, painted in white letters that had faded to gray. Then a gravel drive flanked by sugar maples, whose bare branches formed a cathedral arch overhead. The truck bounced through ruts, frozen into ridges, past a barn with a bowed roofline and a hay door hanging from one hinge, and came to rest beside a house that looked exactly like what it was. A place built by hands that loved the land and maintained by hands that were running out of strength. It was a Cape Cod white clabbered green shutters, a chimney of riverstone. The kind of house that appeared on Vermont postcards, except the paint was peeling in long curls, and the porch steps had been patched with plywood, and 2 of the shutters were nailed shut over windows that had cracked in last winter's ice storm. A cord of split firewood was stacked against the south wall, not enough. Dot knew it wasn't enough. She'd counted every log. She helped Connie out of the truck and up the steps, one arm around the woman's waist, feeling the ribs beneath the overcoat like the bars of a cage. The garbage bag bumped against the railing as they climbed. Connie would not let go of it. Her fingers were locked around the twisted plastic with a grip that defied her frailty. Inside the house smelled of wood smoke and something else, something sweet and dark like molasses or memory. The kitchen was the heart of the home, as kitchens are in houses where the living room is too cold to sit in from November through April. A cast-iron wood stove squatted in the corner, its belly glowing orange through the grate. The floor was white plank pine worn smooth in the paths between stove and sink and table and door. The wallpaper, a pattern of small blue flowers that must have been cheerful once, had yellowed and curled at the seams. Everything was clean. That was the first thing Connie noticed. Not the poverty she had expected poverty, but the cleanliness surprised her. The counters were wiped. The dish towel was folded. The single window above the sink had been washed recently enough to let in the weak November light without distortion. There was dignity here. Dignity in the arrangement of 3 ceramic canisters labeled flour, sugar, coffee. Dignity in the small jar of dried wildflowers on the windowsill. Queen Anne's lace preserved from summer, still holding its shape. And on the wall beside the stove, in a wooden frame that had been sanded and refinished with care, a photograph. Connie's eyes found it immediately. A man, mid-60s, maybe older, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from the landscape itself. Broad forehead, deep-set eyes, a jaw that could have been cut from granite. He was wearing a flannel shirt and a canvas vest. And he was smiling not at the camera, but at something off-frame, something that amused him. And the smile was so genuine, so full of private delight, that it made the whole kitchen feel warmer. "Sit here." Dot pulled a chair from the table and positioned it near the stove. "I'll get you something warm." Connie lowered herself into the chair, the garbage bag at her feet, the wool blanket still around her shoulders. She could not stop looking at the photograph. Something about the man's face tugged at her. Not recognition exactly, but resonance, like hearing a melody, but can't name. Dot moved through this kitchen with the efficiency of long practice. She ladled soup from a pot on the stove, white bean and rosemary made that morning from dried beans she'd grown herself, and the last of the rosemary from the garden before the frost took it. There was enough for one generous bowl and one modest one. She filled the larger bowl and set it in front of Connie with a spoon, a folded napkin, and a glass of water from the tap. Eat slow. Your stomach's probably not used to much right now. Connie looked at the bowl. Steam rose from the surface, carrying the scent of herbs and salt and sustenance. She looked at Dot standing at the counter, pouring a glass of water for herself. You're not eating. I had a big lunch at the market. Picked up a sandwich. The lie came easily, because it was a lie Dot had told before to the church ladies who brought casseroles. She couldn't reciprocate to the man at the feed store who offered her credit. She couldn't repay to herself every night when the hunger sat in her stomach like a stone, and she told it that tomorrow would be better. Connie heard the lie. She had spent 82 years listening to people, and she knew the sound of a woman who hadn't eaten today and wouldn't eat tonight, because she'd given her only bowl of soup to a stranger who smelled like a dumpster. She also heard Dot's stomach, a low growl quickly suppressed, and saw the way Dot's eyes lingered on the steam rising from the bowl for just a fraction of a second before looking away. This is what I came to find, Connie thought, and the thought was so sharp it hurt. This is real. She ate. The soup was extraordinary, not because of the ingredients which were humble, but because of the care. The beans were tender. The rosemary was fresh enough to taste green. There was a depth to the broth that came from time, from a pot left on low heat all day, from attention paid by someone who understood that feeding another person was an act of love, regardless of what was in the bowl. When she finished, Dot took the bowl, washed it, dried it, and set it back in the cupboard. One bowl, Connie noticed. There was only one bowl. Dot led her down a narrow hallway to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The bed was a single iron-framed, covered with a quilt that had been mended so many times it was more thread than original fabric. The sheets were white, sun-dried, and smelled of lavender. Not perfume, but actual lavender-dried sprigs tucked between the folds. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a candle in a tin holder. This is the warmest room in the house. The stovepipe runs through the wall right there, so you get heat all night. Bathrooms across the hall. There's a clean towel on the hook. Connie sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was thin, but the springs didn't creak, and the pillow, when she touched it, was soft in the way that only old down pillows are collapsed by 1,000 nights of use into the perfect shape of rest. Where will you sleep? I've got the sofa in the front room. I sleep out there most nights anyway, closer to the stove. Another lie, and they both knew it, and neither said so. Dot paused at the door. Rest now, Connie. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. You're safe here. Nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to take your things. She reached for the light switch, then stopped, turned back. That man in the photo, she said quietly. In the kitchen. That's Walter, my husband. He passed 3 years ago come October. He was the best man I ever knew, and I miss him every single day. And the only thing I have left of him is that farm and this house, and I'm about to lose those too. So I understand what it's like to hold on to the only thing you've got left. She looked at the garbage bag sitting on the floor beside the bed. Whatever's in there, it's yours. This is your room for as long as you need it. Good night, Connie. The door closed softly. Connie sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. The stovepipe in the wall ticked as the metal expanded and contracted. Somewhere above, a beam settled with a groan that sounded almost human. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the snow against the window in waves. She reached down and pulled the garbage bag onto the bed. Her hands found the twist tie, undid it, reached past the layers of old clothes and crushed cans she'd collected for camouflage, past the smell and the grime down to the bottom where the plastic was thicker, double-layered, sealed with tape. She felt the leather portfolio through the wrapping. The documents were dry, safe. She could end this right now. She could walk into that kitchen, open the portfolio, show Dorothea Hale the trust papers, the bank statements, the royalty reports with their columns of figures that looked like phone numbers. She could say, "I am not what I seem. I have enough money to save your farm 10 times over. Let me help you." But she did not move, because she had said those words before to her own son, to her own daughter, and they had taken the money and given her a room in the back of the house with no lock on the door. And then they had taken the room, and then they had taken her dignity, and then they had changed the locks and told her she was a burden, a liability, an embarrassment, a line item to be eliminated. She needed to know if this woman, this Dorothea who gave away her only soup and lied about lunch and surrendered her own bed and wrapped a stranger in a blanket she'd been knitting for her dead husband, was real. Not kind for a day real, not kind until the cost becomes clear real, but real in the way the ground is real, permanent, structural. The kind of goodness that doesn't evaporate when the money shows up or dissolve when the work gets hard. The test would continue. Connie lay back on the pillow that smelled of lavender and loss, pulled the wool blanket up to her chin and thought. That man in the photograph. Walter Hale. He had a sister named Rosalind, a sister who spent 8 years as Edmund's private nurse, a sister who held my husband's hand when he died because I was in the hospital myself and couldn't be there. Is it possible? Is it possible that this road, this storm, this woman, this house, is it possible that none of it is accident? She closed her eyes. Sleep came fast, pulled her under like a warm current. For the first time in 11 days, Constance Aldridge did not dream of locks changing, or doors closing, or the sound of her own daughter's voice saying, "Mother, you smell like a nursing home. Please, just go." She dreamed, instead of wool, of someone knitting, of a blanket growing longer in the dark, one row at a time, patient and slow. The way trust is built between strangers who have every reason not to trust at all. Morning came to Haverstone the way it always came in November. Grudgingly, the sun hauling itself over the mountains like a man late for work, casting long blue shadows across the snow that had fallen overnight. 5 inches. Enough to bury the porch steps, enough to turn the gravel drive into a white field, enough to make the world look clean and new and full of lies. Dot was already up. She'd been up since 4:30, stoking the wood stove, boiling water for coffee, mixing batter for cornbread from the last of the cornmeal in the canister. She'd slept on the kitchen floor beside the stove, wrapped in Walter's old Carhartt jacket, using a sofa cushion as a pillow. Her back ached in 3 places. Her hip, the left one, sent a bolt of pain down her leg with every step. She did not complain. Complaining required an audience, and there was no audience. There was only the stove, the snow, and the smell of coffee that was more water than bean, but still managed to taste like morning. She heard Connie before she saw her. The slow shuffle of feet in the hallway, the tap of knuckles against the door frame. Connie appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing the same clothes from last night, but somehow looking more alive. The hypothermic pallor had retreated, replaced by a ruddy warmth in her cheeks. Her grey eyes were clear focused, taking inventory of the kitchen, with a sharpness that seemed at odds with the fragile frame. "Good morning, Connie. There's coffee. It's not strong, but it's hot. Cornbread's almost done. You didn't sleep on the sofa." Connie said it as a fact, not a question. She had noticed the cushion on the floor, the jacket folded neatly on the chair. "You slept on the floor. For me." Dot set a mug on the table without answering. Connie walked to the table with careful steps, her arthritic hands finding the chair back, lowering herself down. Her eyes returned to the photograph of Walter. In the morning light, the details were sharper. The laugh lines around his eyes, the slight crook in his nose where it had been broken once, and there unmistakable now in the clarity of daylight, the chin, the square jaw with the shallow cleft. The Hale jaw, Dot might call it, but Connie knew that jaw by another name. Tell me about him. Connie wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Tell me about Walter. Dot sat down across from her. The cornbread timer ticked softly on the counter. She looked at the photograph the way you look at a window that opens onto a room you can no longer enter. Walter was a man who believed the land was alive, not in a mystical way, in a practical way. He talked to the trees the way you talk to coworkers. Good morning, old girl, he'd say to the big sugar maple by the barn. She's 200 years old, that tree. He knew every root, every tap line. He built this farm from nothing. His parents left him 40 acres of rocks and regret, and he turned it into something that mattered. She paused. The candle on the windowsill flickered in a draught. He never made money. That wasn't what he was for. He was for making things grow and making people feel like they belonged somewhere. He used to say, she stopped, pressed her lips together. Used to say what? Dot looked at the blanket still draped over Connie's shoulders. Walter's blanket, the one she couldn't finish. He used to say that warmth isn't something you keep, it's something you give away. Connie set down the mug very slowly. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. Did Walter have family? Brothers, sisters? Dot nodded. A sister, Rosalind. We called her Roz. She was a nurse, a good one, the real kind. The kind who holds your hand at 3 in the morning. She worked private care for years. Took care of some wealthy man up in Burlington for almost a decade, lived in his house, became part of his family, really. Walter always said Roz had more love to give than anyone he'd ever met. Connie's fingers tightened on the mug. What happened to her? After the man she cared for passed away. Oh, this was maybe 10, 12 years ago. The family let her go. Just like that. No pension, no thanks, just a check and a goodbye. She moved to a nursing home down in Brattleboro. Walter visited when he could. After Walter died, I tried to keep going, but the drive is 3 hours each way and the truck eats gas, and I haven't been in over a year. I send letters. She doesn't always write back. I think her eyesight's going. Connie turned her face toward the window. The snow outside was blinding white, a blank page. Inside her chest, a pressure was building. Not pain exactly, but the weight of a truth so heavy it threatened to crush her if she held it any longer, and destroy everything if she let it go too soon. The man Rosalind cared for. Did Walter ever mention his name? Dot frowned, searching her memory. Edmund something, Aldridge maybe. I'm not sure. Why? Connie brought the mug to her lips and drank. The coffee tasted like nothing. The name Aldridge hung in the air between them, invisible, radioactive, connecting two strangers through a web of history neither fully understood. No reason, just curious. He sounds like he was lucky to have her. She changed the subject, asked about the maple operation, asked about the barn, asked about the cornbread recipe. Safe questions, patient questions. The questions of a woman who has decided to wait because the next move requires absolute certainty, and certainty, like maple syrup, cannot be rushed. It must be boiled slowly, reduced to its essence, until what remains is true. The cornbread came out golden and steaming. Dot cut it into squares, put 2 on a plate for Connie with a spoonful of apple butter, and took 1 small square for herself. Connie watched her eat it in 3 careful bites, making it last, and knew the way you know the weather by the ache in your bones that this was Dot's only food until evening. Then the sound came, a high-pitched mechanical whine growing louder, cutting through the snow silence like a dentist's drill. The snowmobile. Nettie Groves, the postmistress of Haverstone, appeared in the yard on a battered Arctic cat, her orange parka visible from half a mile away, her mail pouch strapped to the back rack. She killed the engine and waded through the snow to the porch steps. Dot opened the door before Nettie could knock. Morning, Dot. Got something for you? Came certified. Had to bring it special. Nettie held out a white envelope. Legal-sized, thick, with a red border along the edges and the return address of the Caledonia County tax assessor, printed in the upper left corner. Final notice was stamped across the front in ink the color of dried blood. Dot took the envelope. Her hand did not shake. Her face did not change. She had been expecting this the way you expect winter, with the knowledge that it's coming and the helplessness of knowing you cannot stop it. Thank you, Nettie. Nettie lingered eyes darting past Dot to the kitchen, where Connie sat wrapped in the wool blanket. Who's your guest? Just a friend, staying for a bit. A friend? Nettie's eyebrows rose. She was already composing the story she'd tell at the post office counter. Dot Hale has some vagrant woman in her house. Can you imagine, as if she doesn't have enough trouble? Dot closed the door. She stood in the hallway holding the envelope, her back to the kitchen. Her shoulders rising and falling with breaths that were too deep to control, the breathing of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. She tore it open, read the letter, read it again. The words were bureaucratic, bloodless, efficient. Property tax delinquent, final notice before lien enforcement. Payment in full of $4,216 required within 30 days. Failure to remit will result in tax lien sale and potential forfeiture of property. 30 days. 30 days to find $4,216. She had 147. Dot walked to the porch, closed the door behind her so Connie wouldn't see, sat down on the top step in the cold, the snow soaking through her jeans, and pressed the letter against her knees. She did not cry. She was past crying. Crying was a luxury for people who still believed that tears could change something. Instead, she sat perfectly still and stared at the field of white in front of her. Walter's field, Walter's trees, Walter's dream, and felt it all slipping away like water through a cracked bowl. I'm sorry. She said it to the snow, to the trees, to the air, to the man who wasn't there. I tried, Walter. I tried so hard and it wasn't enough. And I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose the only thing you ever asked me to keep. Behind her inside the house, Connie stood at the kitchen window. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Dot's shoulders. She could see the letter. She could see the posture of a woman whose last wall was crumbling. And Connie Aldridge, who could write a check for $4,000 the way most people drop a coin in a tip jar, who could buy this farm and the next farm and the county courthouse if she wanted. Pressed her hand against the cold glass and made a decision. Not yet, but soon, very soon, because the test was almost over, and Dorothea Hale had already passed. That night, the wood stove burned low. Dot sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the tax letter flattened before her, her fingers tracing the red border like a prisoner tracing the walls of a cell. The candle on the windowsill had guttered to a stub, throwing a light so weak it barely reached the edges of the room. She heard the creak of floorboards. Connie appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with purpose, the wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. She crossed the kitchen without speaking, pulled out the chair across from Dot and sat down. For a moment neither spoke. The stove ticked. The wind pressed against the windows. Two old women in a cold kitchen, separated by a table and connected by something neither had a name for yet. Don't cry alone, Dorothea. Dot looked up. Her eyes were dry but devastated, the eyes of someone who has spent all her tears and has nothing left but the salt. Connie reached across the table and took her hand, the swollen, work-roughened hand of a woman who had spent 68 years giving and receiving nothing, and held it in both of hers. Two old women crying together, the tears weigh half as much. Dot stared at her. At this stranger she'd pulled from a ditch less than 24 hours ago, who smelled of borrowed soap now instead of roadside mud, who wore her dead husband's blanket like it belonged there. And for the first time since Walter died, for the first time in 3 years of sleeping alone, eating alone, worrying alone, praying alone, Dorothea Hale felt a hand in hers that was not letting go. She broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She broke the way old wood breaks, with a slow, deep crack that travels the length of the grain, splitting something that looked solid into two pieces that can never be rejoined in quite the same way. She put her head down on the table and wept. And Connie held her hand through all of it steady as a stone in a river. While the snow fell and the stove died, and the blanket lay between them unfinished, waiting for hands that had finally found a reason to keep going. 3 days passed. 3 days that moved at the pace of sap in cold weather, slow, thick, unhurried by anything except gravity and the ancient patience of trees. Connie stayed. This was not discussed or negotiated or arranged with any formality. She simply did not leave, and Dot simply did not ask her to. And the absence of that conversation became its own kind of agreement. The way two animals sharing a den in winter agree without language that warmth is better than solitude and that neither has anywhere else to go. They fell into rhythm. Dot woke first, always stoking the wood stove before dawn, putting the kettle on, moving through the kitchen in the dark with the sureness of a woman who has counted every step in her own home for 40 years. Connie woke second, appearing in the doorway when the coffee was ready. Her gray eyes sharp despite the hour, her hands already reaching for something useful. She peeled potatoes. She sorted dried beans, picking out the stones and the shriveled ones with fingers that moved slowly, but missed nothing. She folded laundry with a precision that bordered on ceremony, each crease deliberate, each edge aligned. On the second morning, Connie found the knitting basket beside Walter's chair. The blanket lay coiled inside like a sleeping animal. The Corriedale wool the color of warm earth. 12 inches of finished fabric attached to 2 birch needles. The working yarn trailing from the last stitch like an unfinished sentence. Connie lifted it carefully, ran her thumb across the knitting. The tension was perfect. Even. The stitches tight enough to block the wind, open enough to breathe. This was the work of a woman who understood structure, that strength comes not from rigidity, but from the consistent repetition of small interlocking gestures. You knit? Connie held up the blanket without turning around. She knew Dot was watching from the kitchen doorway. I used to. This yarn, you spun this yourself, from our own sheep, Walter's flock. I sold the last of them 2 winters ago when the hay got too expensive. Kept the wool from the final shearing. That's what's left. Connie turned the needles in her hands. There's enough yarn here to finish this twice over. You stopped in the middle of a row. Nobody stops in the middle of a row unless something stops them first. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of the thing Dot could not say, which was that she had been knitting this blanket for a man who died before she could give it to him. And that every stitch she'd made since carried the weight of a gift that would never be received. And that finishing it meant admitting he was gone in a way that not finishing it somehow didn't. Connie set the blanket back in the basket. She did not push. But that afternoon, while Dot was outside splitting kindling, each swing of the maul, a small war against the cold and the debt and the calendar. Connie sat in Walter's chair, picked up the needles, and began to knit. Her arthritis made it agony. Each stitch required her to force her fingers into positions they no longer wanted to hold the joints, grinding like rusted hinges. She went slowly, 1 stitch per breath, 1 row per hour, and the fabric that emerged from her needles was different from Dot's, looser, uneven, the work of hands that remembered the craft but could no longer execute it with precision. When Dot came inside at dusk, stamping snow from her boots, she saw the blanket in Connie's lap. 3 new rows had been added. They were imperfect, the tension wobbly, the edges slightly wider than Dot's section, but they held. Dot stood in the doorway, looking at the blanket at the visible seam where her knitting ended, and Connie's began. 2 different hands joined in the same fabric, and she opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, and went to start supper. That night, after Connie had gone to bed, Dot sat in Walter's chair and picked up where Connie had left off. She knitted 6 rows. Tight even her rows. Then she set the needles down and placed the blanket back in the basket. And the blanket was longer now, and it was no longer hers alone. On the 3rd day, Reverend Eldon Birch came to call. He arrived on foot the way he always did, walking the 1.5 miles from the church in his ancient LL Bean boots and his black overcoat with the torn lining. Eldon Birch was 74, and looked 90 and moved like a man of 60 long strides, straight back a walking stick. He carried more for punctuation than support, tapping it against the ground to emphasize points that only he could hear. He had been the minister of Harvestone Methodist for 41 years. He had baptized babies who were now grandparents. He had buried men he'd coached in Little League. He knew every secret in town except his own, which was that he still cried during the hymns when he thought the choir was loud enough to cover it. He knocked twice. Dot opened the door. "Eldon, come in. Coffee's thin, but it's honest." He stepped inside, removed his hat, and immediately saw Connie sitting at the kitchen table peeling an apple with a paring knife. His eyebrows rose, but he said nothing about the visitor. Ministers in small towns learn early that the fastest way to lose trust is to ask questions before you've been invited to. "Nettie tells me you got a letter. Red border." Dot's jaw tightened. Nettie should sell tickets to her gossip show. She means well. Eldon accepted the mug she offered and wrapped both hands around it. "How bad is it, Dot?" 30 days, $4,216. "I have 147. Eldon set the mug down, looked at the floor. The math was brutal, and there was no sermon that could change it. "The church emergency fund has about 300. I could make some calls. The Grange, maybe. The VFW. Dot shook her head. "I'm not taking charity, Eldon. Walter would roll over in his grave. Walter would roll over in his grave if you lost this farm because you were too proud to ask for help." Connie, who had been peeling the apple in one continuous strip, a skill she'd learned from her own mother 70 years ago, set the knife down. "How much syrup can you make between now and the end of the month?" She addressed Dot directly, her voice carrying a casual authority that made both Dot and Eldon look at her. Dot blinked. "Syrup. It's November. Sugaring season doesn't start until February. Not table syrup. Late run syrup. Boiled hard. Dark grade. You've got sap buckets in the barn and the evaporator still works. I heard you talking about it yesterday. The trees won't give much this time of year, but they'll give something if the freeze-thaw cycle cooperates. And dark grade sells to restaurants for more than light grade sells at farmers' markets." Dot stared at her. "How do you know that?" Connie shrugged. But behind the shrug was a lifetime of managing a timber empire that included 12,000 acres of sugar bush in the Northeast Kingdom. "I had a friend who sugared long time ago. The point is, you're sitting on inventory you haven't tapped, literally." Eldon looked from one woman to the other. His minister's instinct, the one that detected shifts in spiritual weather, the way a barometer detects pressure. Changes told him something was happening in this kitchen that was bigger than a tax bill. "She's not wrong, Dot. Late SAP's thin, but your evaporator runs hot. Remember that year Walter got 40 gallons of a late November thaw." Dot was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window at the sugar maples, bare now skeletal against the gray sky but alive underneath their root systems, pulling water from deep in the frozen earth. Preparing for a spring they couldn't see but trusted was coming. "I'd need help hanging the buckets. My shoulder can't take the ladder anymore. I'll send the Greer boys over tomorrow." Eldon stood put on his hat. "They owe me for all the sermons they've slept through." He paused at the door, looked at Connie, looked at Dot. "I don't know where you found her, Dot, but I'd say the Lord put her in your path for a reason." He walked out into the cold, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm on the frozen ground. The next 4 days were a blur of work. The Greer boys, 2 brothers in their 20s, big and quiet and raised on dairy farms, arrived at 7 the first morning and hung 200 sap buckets by nightfall. Dot worked alongside them, climbing the lower ladders herself, despite the shoulder, because this was her farm and her trees, and she would not stand on the porch watching other people save her life. Connie worked too, not in the field, her body wouldn't allow it, but in the kitchen, transforming the small stock of food into meals that stretched further than seemed possible. She made soup from bones Dot had been saving in the freezer. She baked bread from flour that Dot swore was too old to rise, but it rose anyway, golden and fragrant, as if the yeast had been waiting for someone who believed in it. And on the third day, something happened that Dot could not explain. She came in from the barn at noon to find a cardboard box on the porch. No label, no note. Inside, a 20-pound bag of cornmeal, a jar of honey, a tin of coffee beans, and a pair of wool socks, hand-knitted in the exact shade of green that Dot had once mentioned was her favorite color. She looked up and down the road. No tracks, no car. The snow was unmarked except for the box's impression on the step, as if it had been placed there by the wind. 2 days later, another box. This one contained a cord of seasoned hardwood not stacked on the porch, but already loaded into the woodshed, as if whoever brought it had known exactly where it went. And tucked under the top log, a folded note in handwriting. Dot didn't recognize for the stove. From someone who remembers. Nettie. Dot said the name when she told Connie about it, shaking her head. Has to be Nettie. She's the only one who knows about the wood situation. Connie said nothing. She was knitting by the stove, adding her crooked rose to the blanket, and she smiled a small private smile that Dot did not see. But it was not Nettie. Dot would learn later, much later, after everything had changed, that the boxes came from 5 different households. The cornmeal from the Greer family, the honey from old Mrs. Felch at the end of Quarry Road, the coffee from Eldon, who had put a discreet note in the church bulletin, asking for donations to an unnamed neighbor in need. The socks from a woman Dot had once treated for free when the woman's daughter had an asthma attack at school, and the family had no insurance. Haverstone was a small town, and small towns have their cruelties. But they also have a memory that runs longer than grudges, and a quiet understanding that when one house goes dark, the whole street gets colder. The sap came. Not much November sap was thin and reluctant, wrung from the trees by a brief warm spell that pushed temperatures above freezing for 3 days before the cold slammed back down. Dot collected it bucket by bucket, hauled it to the sugar house behind the barn, and fed the evaporator until the building filled with steam so thick she couldn't see her own hands. The syrup that emerged was dark, almost black, with a flavor that was not sweet but deep, smoky mineral. The taste of late autumn concentrated to its essence. 14 gallons. That's all the trees gave her. 14 gallons of dark, robust grade bottled in mason jars with handwritten labels. At restaurant prices, $28 a jar, that was $392. Added to what she had, it brought her total to just over 500. She needed 4,216. The math hadn't changed, but something else had. Dot was no longer alone at the table staring at the numbers. Connie sat beside her now, and the blanket was growing, and the house smelled of bread, and there were socks on her feet that someone had knitted in her favorite color, and all of it together added up to something that wasn't money, but was perhaps more valuable. Then the phone rang. The landline, a rotary model mounted to the kitchen wall. Mustard yellow, installed in 1979 and never replaced, screamed into the silence of a Tuesday morning, with a ring so shrill it made both women jump. Dot dried her hands on her apron and picked up the receiver. Hello, is this the Hale residence? The voice on the other end was male, clipped efficient. I'm looking for a woman named Constance Aldridge. I have reason to believe she may be staying at your address. Dot looked at Connie. Connie's face had gone rigid. Her hands holding the knitting needles were perfectly still. Who is this? My name is Graham Aldridge. I'm her son. The word son landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into a well. Dot watched Connie's expression change not to fear, but to something colder, harder. A door slamming shut behind the eyes. She's here, she's resting. She was in very bad shape when I found her, Mr. Aldridge. Hypothermic, malnourished. Yes, well, my mother has a tendency toward dramatics. Listen, Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale, I appreciate you taking her in. I'll be there tomorrow to collect her. What's the address? Collect her. Dot's voice dropped half an octave. She's not a package, Mr. Aldridge. I didn't mean look, she's elderly and confused. She wandered off from her care arrangement several weeks ago. We've been worried sick. Across the room, Connie shook her head slowly. One word formed on her lips without sound. Lies. We just want to bring her somewhere safe, Graham continued. I'm driving up from Burlington. I'll have my sister with me. We should be there by noon tomorrow if the roads are clear. Dot opened her mouth to argue, but Connie caught her eye and nodded. The nod said, let them come. Let them walk into this kitchen with their expensive shoes and their expensive lies, and let me see their faces when they look at what they threw away. Fine. Noon tomorrow. Route 12 to Haverstone, left at the church, mile and a half up the hill. Mailbox says Hale. You can't miss it. She hung up. The receiver clattered against the cradle. Your son and my daughter. Connie set the knitting down. They'll be here tomorrow with papers, Dorothea. Legal papers, guardianship forms, a commitment order for a state-run care facility. How do you know? Because that's what they wanted the night they changed my locks. I wouldn't sign then. I won't sign now. But they'll come anyway because they think I'm senile and alone and that you... She looked at Dot with an apology already forming in her gray eyes. They'll think you're nobody. A hick. A pushover. They'll talk past you like you're furniture. Dot pulled out a chair and sat down hard. Let them try. Connie leaned forward. Listen to me carefully. When they come, don't defend me. Let them say what they say. Let them insult this house, insult your cooking, insult your life. I need them to believe they've already won. I need them to show me exactly who they are one last time so there is no doubt left. No sliver of hope. I'm clinging to that. Maybe somewhere underneath the greed my children still have hearts. Why? Because what comes after depends on their answer. Dot studied the woman across from her. This Constance Aldridge, who had arrived on her doorstep looking like a bundle of rags, and was now sitting straight-backed and bright-eyed, issuing instructions with the calm precision of a field commander. Something had shifted. The frailty was falling away. Or perhaps it had never been as deep as it appeared. You're not what you seem, Connie. Nobody's Dorothea. That's the whole point. They prepared the house. Or rather, they unprepared it. Connie directed the operation with quiet efficiency. Take that quilt off the sofa. Let the spring show. Hide the bread, put it in the barn under a cloth. Leave only water on the table. The cleaner this place looks, the less they'll respect it. They need to see poverty. It confirms what they already believe about people like you, and it makes them careless. Dot obeyed, though it cost her. Each thing she removed the dried flowers from the windowsill, the embroidered towel from the oven handle. The small jar of apple butter she'd been saving felt like peeling away a layer of her own skin. These were not decorations. They were the evidence of care. The proof that a woman living alone in a failing farmhouse had not yet surrendered to despair. When the kitchen was stripped down to its bones, bare table, bare walls, the stove still warm, but the room looking hollowed out and defeated. Connie surveyed the result and nodded. Good. Now you, me, your hands are clean. Rub some ash from the stove into your apron. And don't fix your hair. They'll read us faster if we look like what they expect. Dot rubbed ash into the cotton. The gray streaks looked like exhaustion made visible. What about you? Connie went to the bathroom. When she came back, her face was smudged with something dark, soot or dirt from the garden bucket by the back door. Her hair, which Dot had helped her wash and comb 2 days ago, was tangled again, pulled loose from its pins. She hunched her shoulders, bent her spine, made herself smaller. The transformation was startling. The sharp-eyed matriarch disappeared, and in her place stood the roadside wreck Dot had pulled from the ditch, trembling, bewildered, broken. You're good at this. Dot said it without admiration. It unsettled her. I've had practice. Connie's voice was the voice of the frail woman, again thin and cracked. My children taught me how to be invisible. I'm just using the lesson they gave me. They came at 12:15. Dot heard them before she saw them. The low purr of an engine too refined for the road it was traveling. followed by the crunch of tires on frozen gravel, and then seconds later, a second engine, higher pitched, aggressive. She moved to the kitchen window. Two vehicles were pulling into the yard. A black sedan polished to a mirror finish. Despite the salt and mud of November roads, behind it, a white SUV with tinted windows and chrome running boards that gleamed like surgical instruments. Dot's hands found the edge of the sink. She gripped it and breathed. The sedan door opened first. A man stepped out, tall, lean, mid-50s, wearing a charcoal topcoat over a suit that had no business being within 50 miles of a working farm. His shoes were leather, thin-soled, the kind designed for marble lobbies and courtroom aisles. They sank into the mud immediately. He looked down at them with a contempt so precise it seemed rehearsed. The SUV produced a woman, younger by a few years, blonde highlights in hair pulled tight, a cream-colored parka trimmed with fur that may or may not have been real. She placed one heel boot on the running board, surveyed the yard, the listing barn, the firewood pile, the pickup with its dented fender, and wrinkled her nose as if the entire property were emitting an odor she found personally offensive. They did not hold the door for each other. They did not speak. They walked toward the house side by side, but separate, two people united only by objective. Dot opened the front door before they reached the steps. She stood in the frame apron streaked with ash hair, loose, a woman shaped by weather and work. She did not smile. "You must be the Aldridges." Graham took the porch steps two at a time, passing Dot without acknowledgement, entering the house, the way a building inspector enters a condemned structure already composing the report. Sloane followed, pulling a silk scarf over her mouth and nose. "Where is she?" "In the front room." They pushed past Dot into the parlor. Connie was in the rocking chair, Walter's blanket around her shoulders, her head lowered, her hands shaking in her lap. She looked up when they entered, and the performance was flawless. Confusion, fear, a pathetic glimmer of hope that the people walking toward her might actually be happy to see her. "Graham." Connie's voice cracked on the name. "You came." He stopped 6 feet away, did not close the distance, did not touch her. His eyes performed a rapid audit the shabby room. The bare sofa, the woman who had given him life now sitting in a stranger's rocking chair, looking like something the river had washed up. "Mother, you look terrible." Sloane stayed near the door, arms crossed, one hand still holding the scarf to her face. "My God, Mom, the smell. Have you not bathed at all? This place is—" She looked around the room with theatrical horror. "Is this where you've been living?" Dot stood in the kitchen doorway. Every muscle in her body was tensed. She could feel her pulse in her temples, her fingertips, her teeth. She watched these two polished, perfumed, immaculate creatures stand in her home and radiate disgust the way the wood stove radiated heat, constantly, effortlessly, without conscious thought. "We brought the paperwork." Graham reached into his coat and produced a manila folder. His movements were brisk, efficient. A man clearing an item from his to-do list. "I have a conservatorship petition here. It grants Sloane and me full legal authority over your finances and medical decisions. And here," he pulled a second document, "is a voluntary admission form for Green Pines, the state-assisted care facility in Montpelier. It's clean, it's supervised, and most importantly, it's funded." "State-assisted?" Connie's voice was small. "But you have money, Graham. Your father left you." "What Dad left is none of your concern anymore, Mother." Graham's jaw tightened. "Dad's money is invested. It's working. It's not sitting in a savings account waiting for you to spend it on." He waved his hand at the room. "Whatever this is." Sloane took a step closer, keeping the scarf in place. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't stay here." This woman, she tilted her head toward Dot without looking at her. "She's not equipped to care for you. You need professionals. You need medication. You need to be somewhere we don't have to worry about getting a phone call that you've frozen to death in some farmhouse." Connie looked at her daughter, looked at the fur-trimmed parka, the manicured nails, the leather handbag that cost more than Dot struck. "Do you worry about me, Sloane? Do you really? Of course I do. Sloane's voice was practiced smooth, the vocal equivalent of a press release. We all do. That's why we're here. Dot bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. She thought of the phone call I'm calling to collect her. Not find her, not help her, collect her. Graham placed the documents on the arm of the rocking chair beside Connie's trembling hand. He produced a pen, black, heavy, expensive. Sign both. We'll have her in Green Pines by Thursday. Then you. He glanced at Dot for the first time, his gaze sliding over her, the way a windshield wiper slides over rain, dismissing her in the same motion that acknowledged her. You can go back to whatever it is you do here. Farming or maple syrup? Dot's voice was level. Right. He turned away. Connie picked up the pen, held it over the first document. The room contracted. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Before I sign, Connie's voice quavered. I want to ask you something. Graham checked his watch. A gold watch, heavy link, the kind that announces its price before it announces the time. What, mother? We have a 4-hour drive back. This woman, Connie gestured toward Dot. She took me in, fed me, gave me her bed, her only blanket. She has almost nothing, and she gave me everything. I owe her something. Could you give her $50? Just 50. To thank her. Sloane laughed, not cruelly worse, dismissively. The laugh of someone for whom $50 is not money, but an abstraction, a number too small to register as real. Mom, we're not paying your hotel bill. She chose to pick you up. That's her decision, her problem. Graham reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet, slim black leather monogrammed, and opened it. His fingers moved past hundreds, past 50s, past 20s. He pinched a single bill between his thumb and forefinger and dropped it on the arm of the rocking chair beside the documents. A $5 bill. There, for your trouble. He said it to Dot without looking at her. Now sign, mother. The $5 bill sat on the wood like a verdict. Abraham Lincoln's face stared at the ceiling, patient and sad, as if even he knew this wasn't enough, but had no authority to intervene. Dot looked at the bill, looked at Graham, looked at Sloane, who was examining her nails with the concentration of someone who has already mentally left the room. Something broke inside Dot, not the slow crack of part one, but a fast, clean snap, the sound of a woman who has spent a lifetime being patient, discovering the exact boundary where patience becomes complicity. She opened her mouth. Connie caught her eye. The look said, not yet. Hold. Let them finish. Let them seal their own coffin. Dot closed her mouth, her hands hanging at her sides, curled into fists so tight her knuckles went white. Connie picked up the $5 bill, smoothed it on her knee the way she'd smooth a christening gown, folded it once, twice, and placed it carefully in the pocket of her borrowed dress. $5. She said it softly, as if memorizing a number for a test. That's what I'm worth to you. It's what the situation warrants, mother. Graham was already closing his briefcase in his mind. Sign the papers. Let's go. Connie set the pen down on the arm of the chair. No. The word was small, but it landed like a stone thrown through a greenhouse. Graham's head snapped toward her. Sloane lowered her hand from her nails. What did you say? I said no. I'm not signing anything today. I'm tired. My hands hurt. Come back tomorrow morning with a real attorney, not these forms you printed off the internet, and I'll consider it. Graham's composure cracked for the first time, a fissure running through the professional mask, revealing the raw thing underneath. This is not a negotiation, mother. You are sitting in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, wearing someone else's clothes. You have no money. You have no options. Sign now. Connie lifted her chin. The trembling stopped. Or what, Graham? You'll hit me. Here. In front of a witness. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Dot had ever heard. Graham looked at Dot. Dot looked back at him. She did not blink. He snatched the pen from the chair, straightened his coat. Tomorrow, first thing. And if you're not ready to sign, I'll have a judge declare you incompetent by the end of the week. Let's go, Sloane." They left the way they'd arrived, without warmth, without backward glances, without the weight of conscience slowing their steps. The sedan reversed hard, spraying gravel against the porch. The SUV followed. The engines faded down the hill, and then there was nothing but the wind and the ticking of the stove, and two women alone in a stripped-down kitchen. Connie sat motionless for a full minute. Then she reached into the pocket of the borrowed dress, took out the $5 bill, and laid it flat on the table. "That is the price of their inheritance, Dorothea. $5 and a form printed from the internet." Her voice had changed. The quaver was gone. The hunch was gone. She sat up straight in the rocking chair, and the woman who emerged from the performance was not the roadside castaway or the frail guest or the patient knitter by the stove. This was someone else entirely. Someone with iron in her spine and fire in her ice-gray eyes, and a plan that had been forming since the moment her son dropped a $5 bill on the arm of a chair and told his mother she was worth what the situation warranted. "I need to tell you something now, and I need you to sit down first." Dot sat, and Connie told her everything. Not in pieces, not wrapped in metaphor or cushioned by apology. She told it straight: the trust, the timber rights, the $12 million locked in accounts that only her signature and thumbprint could open. She told her about Edmund, about the empire he'd built in maple and hardwood, about the children who had sold every asset they could reach, and then turned on the woman who held the keys to the ones they couldn't. She told her about the garbage bag and the portfolio sewn into its lining, and the documents that could buy this farm, this town, this county. And then she told her about Rosalind, your Walter's sister, Ros. She was Edmund's nurse for the last 8 years of his life. She held his hand when he died. I was in the hospital pneumonia, and I couldn't be there. And Ros stayed with him through the last night. She sang to him. She sang hymns. Edmund wasn't a religious man, but he said Ros's voice made him believe there might be something worth arriving to. Dot was gripping the edge of the table. Her face was ashen. "You knew. You knew since the first night. You saw Walter's picture, and you knew." "I suspected. I wasn't certain until you told me about Ros caring for a man named Edmund Aldridge. Then I knew. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know if your kindness was real. I've been rich my whole life. Dorothea and I have learned that money is a mirror. It doesn't change who people are. It shows who they always were. My children saw my money and became vultures. I needed to know what you would see, what I would see. I'm a dirty old woman who showed up on your road with a bag of garbage. You gave me your soup, your bed, your dead husband's blanket. You slept on the floor. You told me I was safe. You didn't ask what was in the bag, not once. You didn't ask because it didn't matter to you." Dot stood up, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Outside the sun was setting, casting the snow in shades of copper and rust. The sugar maples threw long shadows across the yard, reaching shadows stretching toward the house, as if trying to hold it. "I don't want your money, Connie. I know. That's why you're going to get it." Dot turned. "There's a man named Orson Whitmore, judge retired. He was Edmund's closest friend and the executor of our original estate plan. He lives 40 minutes south in Middlebury. I need you to bring him here tonight. Tonight. It's already dark. The roads, Graham will be back tomorrow with a court order. If he gets a sympathetic judge, and he knows how to find sympathetic judges, he can have me declared incompetent and take control of the trust by Friday. We have 12 hours. Dot looked at the truck keys hanging by the door, looked at the $5 bill on the table, looked at the photograph of Walter smiling at something off camera, something only he could see. She took the keys off the hook. "I'll be back in 2 hours. Don't open the door for anyone." Connie reached across the table and squeezed Dot's hand. One squeeze, firm, warm. "Thank you, Dorothea, for everything. Not for this, for the soup. The soup was what saved me." Dot drove into the night, the headlights cutting white tunnels through the black. the truck rattling over frozen roads. Behind her in the farmhouse kitchen, Connie picked up the knitting needles and added another row to the blanket. Her hands ached. The stitches were imperfect. She kept going. She came back at 10:45 with a man in the passenger seat. Judge Orson Whitmore was 79 years old, wore a tweed jacket that smelled of pipe tobacco and law libraries, and carried a leather satchel containing his notary seal. His personal stationery and a Mont Blanc pen he'd received from Edmund Aldridge on the occasion of his appointment to the bench in 1987. He entered the kitchen, saw Connie, and removed his hat. "Constance, my God, we thought you were dead." "Not dead, Orson, just buried alive for a while. Sit down. We have work to do and we don't have much time." They worked until 3 in the morning. The kitchen table became a desk. Whitmore drafted the new will in longhand. His handwriting, small, precise, every legal phrase weighted and tested against 40 years of jurisprudence. Connie dictated. Her voice was clear, unwavering, each clause delivered with the certainty of a woman who has been composing this document in her mind for months, waiting only for the right pen and the right witness and the right moment. "I, Constance Aldridge of sound mind and body, and Orson, make sure the medical certification is attached. I want this airtight to hereby revoke all previous testamentary instruments and declare this my last will and testament." Dot sat in the corner, the blanket in her lap, her needles moving automatically. She was adding rows she wouldn't remember knitting. The scratch of the pen and the click of the needles formed a counterpoint, two instruments playing different melodies in the same key. At 2:15, Whitmore read the final clause aloud. "To Dorothea Hale, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all assets held in the Edmund Aldridge Family Trust, all timber and mineral rights, and all accumulated royalties, in recognition of a debt that no amount of money can repay, but which this gesture attempts to honor." Dot stopped knitting. "Connie, I told you I don't want. It's not about what you want. It's about what's right." Connie signed the document. Her signature was steady. No tremor, no hesitation. "My children will contest this. They will claim I was coerced, confused, manipulated. That's why Orson is here, an independent witness, a retired judge, a man whose reputation is beyond reproach. And because I brought this." Whitmore produced a small recording device from his satchel. "I've been recording since I arrived." Constance's dictation, her reasoning, her state of mind, all documented. Any competency challenge will be met with 3 hours of clear, coherent testimony. He sealed the document with red wax. The stamp pressed into the soft surface with a sound like a small, decisive heartbeat. Connie looked at the clock. 6 hours until Graham returns. She turned to Dot. "Now we set the stage one last time. I need my old clothes back, the dirty ones, and I need you to strip this kitchen again worse than before. I want Graham and Sloane to walk in here and see exactly what they expect to see. A pathetic old woman in a miserable house with nothing left to fight with. And then..." Connie smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who has spent 82 years learning that mercy is a privilege you earn, and justice is a debt you collect. "And then I'm going to show them what $5 buys." Dot looked at the blanket in her lap. Two halves, her tight, even stitches, and Connie's loose, imperfect ones, joined at the center, growing towards something neither of them could see yet. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was creeping over the Green Mountains, and somewhere in Burlington, Graham Aldridge was pressing his best suit and rehearsing the speech he would give his mother about dignity and practicality and the natural order of things, never suspecting that the natural order was about to be rewritten by two old women, a retired judge and a blanket that nobody had finished knitting alone. They arrived at 9 sharp. 2 engines, 2 clouds of exhaust in the frozen morning air, 2 doors slamming with the finality of gavels. Graham had brought reinforcements. A third man emerged from the sedan's passenger side, short round, sweating, despite the cold, carrying a briefcase that didn't close properly, and wearing a tie knotted too tight against a collar, yellowed at the edges. This was his notary. Dot could tell from 30 feet away that the man was the kind of professional who asked no questions because questions complicated the fee. Sloane had changed clothes, a black blazer over a cashmere sweater, as if attending a board meeting rather than a deathbed. She held a phone to her ear as she crossed the yard speaking to someone about a dinner reservation and did not hang up until she reached the porch steps. Graham pushed through the door without knocking. The notary followed, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. Sloane entered, last surveyed the stripped kitchen better now than yesterday, the poverty displayed like evidence in a trial, and made a sound in her throat that was part sigh, part gag. Connie was in position, rocking chair, dirty clothes, trembling hands, head bowed. The performance of a lifetime delivered by a woman who understood that the most dangerous weapon in any negotiation is the enemy's certainty that they have already won. Graham dropped a fresh set of documents on the table. No greeting, no preamble. He uncapped a pen. We've had these reviewed by counsel overnight. Conservatorship voluntary commitment and a full asset transfer. Mr. Burney here will notarize on site. You sign, we leave, and this is over. He turned to the notary. Ready. Burney nodded already, arranging his stamp and inkpad on the edge of the table with the fussy precision of a man who has notarized things he shouldn't have and knows it and does it anyway. Connie reached for the pen. Her fingers closed around it. The room held its breath. Graham leaning forward, Sloane checking her phone. Burney adjusting his stamp. Dot standing rigid in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed over her ash-streaked apron. Before I sign. Connie's voice was the cracked, thin voice of the frail woman. I need to ask you one thing. Graham exhaled through his nose. We did this yesterday, Mother. One thing. Then I'll sign. I promise. He waved his hand, a gesture that said, Go ahead, make it quick. I'm billing by the hour even when I'm not. Do you love me? The question fell into the room like a match into dry leaves. Not because it was unexpected Graham had prepared for emotional manipulation. His attorney had coached him, but because of the way Connie asked it, simply, without drama, the way you would ask someone if it was raining. Graham straightened his tie. Of course we love you, Mother. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing all of this to make sure you're cared for. And you, Sloane, do you love me? Sloane lowered her phone. Mom, obviously. But love doesn't mean I can take care of you myself. I have my own life. You understand that. It's not personal. It's just logistics. Logistics. Connie repeated the word as if tasting it. Your mother's life is logistics. Sign the papers, Mom. Please. We have a long drive. Connie looked at the pen in her hand, looked at the documents covered in small print and smaller mercies, looked at the $5 bill still lying on the table where she'd placed it last night. Smooth flat, a monument to contempt. She set the pen down. No. Graham's hand slammed the table. The notary's stamp jumped. Sloane's phone clattered to the floor. We are done playing games, Mother. You are going to sign these papers right now, or I will... You will what? Connie's voice changed. Mid-sentence, mid-breath, the tremor vanished. The hunch dissolved. Her spine straightened vertebra by vertebra until she was sitting at her full height in the rocking chair, and the woman who looked back at her son was not the trembling ruin he had driven 4 hours to dispose of. Her gray eyes were dry, clear, burning. Graham stepped backward. One step. Involuntary. The step of a man who has just realized that the animal he cornered is not injured. What is happening? Sloane's voice pitched upward. Mom, what are you doing? Connie looked past them both toward the kitchen doorway. Come in, Orson. It's time. The back door opened. Judge Orson Whitmore entered the kitchen from the hallway where he'd been sitting since 7 o'clock in the room. Dot had given Connie the first night, listening through the wall to every word, every silence, every lie delivered in the language of filial duty. He carried his leather satchel in one hand and a blue portfolio in the other. The portfolio from the garbage bag, the one sealed with Edmund's gold emblem. the one containing documents that could purchase the future or burn it to the ground, depending on whose hands they landed in. Graham's face went the color of old ash. He recognized Whitmore immediately. Everyone in Burlington legal circles knew Whitmore. The man was incorruptible. He was also Edmund's oldest friend, the architect of the original trust and the one person alive who knew its full architecture, Judge Whitmore. Graham's voice had shed its authority. It was the voice of a boy caught in a lie by a teacher he cannot charm. What are you doing here? Whitmore set the portfolio on the table, opened it with both hands carefully, the way you open a Bible before a reading. He removed his glasses from his breast pocket, placed them on his nose, and looked at Graham over the rims. I am here in my capacity as a notary public and as an independent witness to the testamentary intentions of Constance Aldridge, whom I have known for 37 years and whose mental competency I am prepared to certify under oath. He paused. I am also here because your mother asked me to be, and because your father would have asked me to be if he could see what you've done with the life he gave you. Graham lunged for the portfolio. Whitmore pulled it back. Those are my father's documents. I have a legal right. You have no rights to this trust, Mr. Aldridge. You never did. The Edmund Aldridge Family Trust is a sole beneficiary instrument. Your mother is the sole beneficiary. Your father structured it that way specifically, and I quote from his letter of intent, to protect Constance from the very scenario I pray never occurs. But fear is inevitable given the character deficiencies I have observed in our children. Those are Edmund's words, written 12 years ago, witnessed by me. The air left Graham's lungs in a single visible collapse. He sat down on the sofa, the bare sofa with its exposed springs, and the springs groaned under him, and nobody laughed. But the house itself seemed to be making a sound. Sloane was backing toward the door. Her hand was reaching for her phone on the floor. How much? The words came out before she could stop them, before the mask of concerned daughter could be reassembled, before anything but raw, reflexive greed could speak. How much is in the trust? Whitmore turned a page. $12,432,000. Accumulated timber royalties, mineral rights, and reinvested dividends, as of last quarter's statement. Sloane's knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe. And the will. Graham's voice was barely audible. Whose name is on the will? Connie stood up. Without the rocking chair, without the blanket, without the prop of frailty. She walked to the table and placed both hands flat on its surface, leaning forward until her face was level with her son's. Read it, Orson. Whitmore read. The kitchen was silent except for his voice and the ticking of the stove, and the wind outside pressing against the windows as if it too wanted to hear. I, Constance Aldridge, hereby revoke all prior wills and testamentary instruments. I disinherit my son Graham Aldridge and my daughter Sloane Aldridge Kessler in their entirety for cause of ingratitude, abandonment, and moral failure. I designate as my sole heir Dorothea Hale of Haverstone, Vermont, a woman who gave me water when I was thirsty, shelter when I was cold, and dignity when my own children stripped me of mine. Graham was on his feet. His face had passed through white into something mottled and purple, the face of a man watching his reflection shatter. This is fraud. This is elder abuse. He jabbed a finger toward Dot. She manipulated you. She found out about the trust and she didn't know. Connie's voice cut through the room. She didn't know until last night. She took me in thinking I was a homeless woman with a bag of garbage. She gave me her only bowl of soup and went to bed hungry. She slept on her own kitchen floor so I could have a bed. She wrapped me in a blanket she'd been knitting for her dead husband because I was cold, and she decided my cold mattered more than her grief. Connie reached across the table and picked up the $5 bill. And you, she held it between her thumb and forefinger the way you hold something that smells. You gave me this, $5, for a lifetime of raising you, feeding you, driving you to school, sitting up with you when you were sick, paying for your law degree, co-signing your first mortgage. $5 and the form from the internet and the seat in a state facility where the sheets are changed once a week if you're lucky. She placed the bill in Graham's breast pocket, pressed it flat against his chest with her palm, held it there. Keep it. You'll need it more than I will. Graham looked down at her hand on his chest. His mother's hand, arthritic, bent, scarred by 82 years of living, pressing a $5 bill into the pocket of a suit that cost $3,000. Mom! His voice broke on the word. It was the first time in the entire visit that he had sounded like her child. Mom, please. We made mistakes. We can fix this. I'll take you home. The house, your room. We'll put everything back. Please. Connie removed her hand, stepped back. My home is here now, Graham. With someone who earned it. She turned away from him, turned toward Dot, who was standing perfectly still in the doorway with tears running down her face and her hands hanging at her sides, and the ash-streaked apron and the loose hair, and the quiet, devastating expression of a woman who is watching something sacred and terrible happen at the same time. Graham grabbed his coat, grabbed Bernie, who had been edging toward the door since Whitmore's entrance, grabbed his sister by the elbow. Sloane was crying loud theatrical sobs that contained no grief, only the sound of a woman recalculating her net worth in real time and finding the new number unacceptable. They left. The door slammed. The engine started. The gravel sprayed. And then they were gone, and the kitchen was quiet, and the $5 bill was gone with them, and the stove was ticking. And two women were standing in a room that looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but was in every way that mattered completely different. Connie's legs gave out. Not performance this time, real. The adrenaline drained from her body all at once, and she staggered sideways, and Dot caught her, held her. Two old women in a cold kitchen holding each other up, because neither could stand alone, and neither had to. It's over. It's over. Whitmore quietly gathered his papers, sealed the portfolio, and placed it in his satchel. He buttoned his coat. Ladies, I'll file the will with the probate court this afternoon. The tax lien on this property will be resolved by end of business tomorrow. I suggest you both get some sleep. He paused at the door. Edmund would be proud, Constance. And Mr. Hale, I didn't know him, but based on the woman he married, I'd say he'd be proud too. The door closed behind him. The latch clicked. The house settled into its bones. Connie sat in the rocking chair. Dot sat on the floor beside her, her back against the warm wall where the stovepipe ran. Neither spoke for a long time. The stove crackled. A beam of winter sunlight came through the window and fell across the floor between them, pale gold thin as paper, warm enough to feel on the skin. Connie, there's one more thing I need to do. Tell me. Rose Walter's sister. She's in a nursing home in Brattleboro. You said she took care of Edmund. She's part of this. She's part of us. Connie closed her eyes, nodded once. Then we go get her. We bring her here. This house has 2 empty rooms and enough years left in these walls to hold 3 stubborn old women who refuse to be thrown away. Dot drove south the next morning with Whitmore's number in her pocket and a cashier's check for the tax lien already deposited. Connie stayed behind. She was too exhausted for the road, but she pressed something into Dot's hand before she left. A square of paper folded twice. Don't read it until you get there. The drive to Brattleboro took 3 hours. The nursing home was a brick building on a hill overlooking the Connecticut River, clean but institutional, the kind of place where the hallways smelled of floor wax and resignation. Dot found the front desk, gave Rosalind Hale's name, and was led to a room at the end of the second-floor corridor. Ros was sitting in a wheelchair by the window facing the river. Her hair was white wispy and her hands rested on the armrests with the stillness of someone who has stopped expecting visitors. She was 72 but looked older the way people look older, when no one is watching them, when there is no reason to sit up straight or fix their hair or pretend that the view from the window is enough. Ros. The woman in the wheelchair turned. Her eyes, Walter's eyes, brown and deep-set, and full of a warmth that survived even the loneliness of institutional care, found Dot's face and widened. Dot, oh Dot, is it really? It's me, Roz. I'm sorry it's been so long. They held each other. Dot knelt beside the wheelchair and wrapped her arms around Walter's sister. This woman she'd known for 30 years and abandoned not from cruelty, but from the same poverty and exhaustion that had slowly stripped away everything in her life that wasn't absolutely essential for survival. She smelled of talcum powder and instant coffee and the sharp antiseptic of medical-grade soap. And underneath all of it, faintly, the scent of something familiar, lavender. The same dried lavender Dot tucked into her own linen closet. I brought someone's words for you. Dot unfolded the square of paper Connie had given her. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Dear Rosalind, you held my Edmund's hand when I could not. You sang him home. I have carried that debt for 12 years, and I have come to believe that debts of the heart can only be repaid in kind. There is a room in Dorothea's house with clean sheets and a window that faces the sugar maples. It is yours. Come home to the family you made when you cared for mine. Constance Aldridge. Roz read the letter twice, pressed it to her chest. She remembers. She remembers everything, Roz, and she's waiting for you. The nursing home processed the discharge in 4 hours. Dot loaded Roz's belongings into the truck. 2 suitcases, a box of books, a framed photograph of Walter at age 12 holding a fishing rod. They drove north as the sun began its long descent behind the mountains, and Roz talked the entire way about Edmund's kindness, about the garden she'd kept at the Aldridge house, about the night Edmund died, and how she'd sung Abide With Me, because it was the only hymn she knew all the words to, and how his hand had tightened on hers during the second verse, and then relaxed, and then let go. When they pulled into the yard at Haverstone, the porch light was on. Connie was standing at the door, wrapped in the wool blanket backlit by the warm glow of the kitchen. Roz saw her from the truck and made a sound, not a word, just a sound. The sound of recognition across years and silence, and the enormous gulf of everything that should have connected them sooner but didn't, because life is not efficient with its reunions. Dot helped Roz up the porch steps. Connie took her hand at the top. You look just like him. Roz was crying. Around the eyes. You look just like Edmund around the eyes. And you, Constance said, squeezing the hand that had held her husband's at the end. You sound just like your brother. They ate supper together. Soup, white bean, and rosemary, the same recipe. But tonight there were 3 bowls and all 3 were full, and nobody lied about having eaten lunch. The kitchen smelled of bread and wood smoke and coffee, and the particular alchemy that occurs when a house built for loneliness is suddenly improbably occupied by people who have chosen each other. After supper, after Roz had been settled in the second bedroom with the window facing the sugar maples, after the dishes were washed and the stove banged for the night, Dot sat in Walter's chair and picked up the knitting. The blanket was nearly finished. She could see it now. The full shape of it, longer than she'd planned, wider than the pattern called for, because it had been made by 2 sets of hands with 2 different tensions and 2 different ideas of what a blanket should be. Her half was tight, and even the stitches uniform disciplined. Connie's half was loose, irregular, full of drop stitches and compensating increases that gave the fabric a texture like terrain, hills and valleys, ridges and hollows. It was not beautiful in any way a judge at a county fair would recognize. It was lumpy and lopsided, and the edges didn't match, and the color shifted slightly where Connie's tighter grip had pulled the yarn thinner. But it was warm. Dot could feel it across her lap, the weight of it. The substance, the accumulated hours of 2 women sitting in the same room, knitting toward each other, from opposite ends of the same piece of wool. She cast off the final stitch, wove in the end, held the blanket up in the lamplight. Connie appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. You finished it. We finished it. Connie crossed the room and sat on the arm of the chair. Dot spread the blanket across both their laps. The seam between their work ran down the center, visible, imperfect, permanent. It's not pretty, Connie said. No. They sat like that for a while. 2 old women under a blanket that neither could have made alone, listening to the house breathe around them. The stove ticking, the beams settling, the wind pressing softly against the windows like a hand asking to come in. Rose's voice drifted from the bedroom. She was humming. "Abide with me." The melody filtered through the wall, thin and sweet. The same melody she'd sung to a dying man 12 years ago in a house 200 miles south of here. And the notes hung in the air of the kitchen and did not dissipate but seemed to settle into the wood and the stone and the wool, becoming part of the structure, part of the warmth, part of what this place would carry forward long after the three of them were gone. Spring came the way it always comes to Vermont, grudgingly at first, then all at once. The snow retreated up the mountains. The brooks swelled, and on a Tuesday morning in late March, the sap began to run. Dot walked the sugar bush at dawn, checking the lines, tapping the new spouts, pressing her hand against the bark of the old maple by the barn, the 200-year-old one Walter used to greet each morning. "Good morning, old girl." The words came out before she knew she was going to say them. She paused, smiled, kept walking. The evaporator fired up that afternoon. Steam poured from the sugar house, thick and sweet, visible from the road. Nettie Groves, passing on her mail road, stopped and stared. The Greer boys pulled over to watch. By evening, Eldon Birch was on the porch with a jar of the first run light. Amber clean, the color of sun through honey, and the news was traveling through Haverstone the way all news travels in small towns, quietly, inevitably. And with the understanding that some stories don't need to be told because they tell themselves. The tax was paid, the farm was saved. The mailbox was straightened and repainted, Hale in white letters, clear and bright, readable from the road. Months later, Dot hung a new sign beneath it, hand-carved cedar. The letters burned in with a soldering iron by Roz, who turned out to have a steady hand and a talent for woodwork that nobody, including Roz, had known about until she tried. The sign read, "Hale Farm, pure Vermont maple warmth given freely." Nobody who drove past understood the last part. But three women on the porch did, one knitting, one humming, one watching the light move across the hills, and that was enough. If this story stayed with you tonight, we'd love for you to subscribe and share it with someone who might need it. And we'd like to leave you with a question not to answer now, but to carry with you into sleep. Think of the people in your life who showed up when you had nothing to offer them. Not the ones who came when the table was full. The ones who came when the cupboard was bare. Have you told them what that meant to you? And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? Good night. Rest well. And may your house always smell of bread and wood smoke, and the knowledge that somebody chose you not for what you have, but for who you are. Until next time, from all of us at Whispered Journeys.